So I'd like to welcome you to this Electoral Area Services Committee of Wednesday, February 9th, and acknowledge that I'm meeting with you on the traditional territories of the Weewakai Nation, and various members are meeting from the traditional territories of other First Nations. So we'll go from there. So I would call the meeting to order. And the first item is the adoption of the public agenda.
Move adoption.
Second.
Okay. Any additions? Okay, thank you. Anyone opposed to the adoption? Hearing none, we have a delegation from Oyster Bay Lands proposal. Rod Nugent to make a presentation on the committee, to the committee regarding the Oyster Bay Lands proposal. Possibly Daryl Hagan. So you have 10 minutes and
Thank you.
We'll say go.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just waiting for my screen to come up here. Can you see it on your side?
No.
Not yet.
If I may,
Yes.
rather than, I think you've hit the request control of the meeting. If you just go to the upper right corner of your screen, you should see a little arrow pointing up. If you
Share.
click on that, it will allow you to share screen.
Don't go to the cat filter though.
How's that? Morning.
Still nothing. Upper right arrow, right next to the leave button.
If you're on a
Rod's
Mac,
busy. Rod's busy working away on it here.
Is that not the same on yours, Tom? Next to the leave button?
That's right, Mr. Chairman. We're in a Microsoft environment here, so if he's on Apple, it might look different on his screen, but there should be in Teams an icon to click on that would allow him to share screen.
Yeah, I've got it on my screen.
There you go.
Okay, now we've got. Okay.
All right, I think we're ready to go. Good morning, my name's Daryl Hagan, and today I'm presenting the 7 landowners, I just lost my screen, who are partners in the application to create the Oyster Bay Rural Residential Community. As you're aware, this application was initiated about a year ago and involves an amendment to the OCP and rezoning process. Today, it is on the meeting agenda for consideration to move forward with the staff preparation of bylaws to facilitate further discussion of this application. I'm here to provide you with a quick review of the application and to report on some of the recent events.
Just stop. Hold.
Okay.
I'll try. So, go to the next
I'm just
slide.
looking to change the page here.
We got it.
Okay, the Oyster Bay Rural Residential Community is a project comprised of approximately 400 acres. There are 7 separate landowners. When completed, the project would encompass 34 separate lots with an average lot size of 11 acres. It overlooks the Oyster Bay on Highway 19A between Campbell River and Oyster River. The applicants are not land developers by profession, but rather are the current landowners who live on the property now and into the future. This ensures that the environmental standards will be enforced. Here's a map of the location of the Oyster Bay Lands. It's quite close to the Driftwood restaurant, as you can see on the highway.
The
We're not
slides are
getting
not
it.
advancing. We're still on the
Well,
first
the
slide.
We're still on the first slide.
I don't know if you have a presentation that you can slide through, or are you just flipping through different pages? If you're doing different pages, you're gonna have to do share screen, undo and redo share screen every time. If it's PowerPoint, just advance the pages here.
So what are you seeing now?
Same, now we're seeing the next page.
Yeah, I think
Which slide?
advance one more slide there.
But we also see all your notes. And now
Yeah.
we're back to the first slide. There you go.
No, we're not there yet. This all worked perfectly yesterday, of course.
Of course.
I could just read it to them.
You should be able to advance it with the arrow key on your keyboard.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to that presenter section. Normal. Here we go. We got it.
Okay, you're back to the first page.
Let's go
Yeah,
forward.
we'll skip through till the fourth, I think.
There we
There
are.
we are. Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry. I hope I don't get graded for the perfection of the presentation. So this is the map here.
Eat up your time, that's all.
Yeah, here's the map of the area and proposed lots. And we're saving some fairly large sections for the equestrian center. As you can see, it's quite close to the Driftwood restaurant, and it's located right in that Oyster Bay area. This is the front of our 22 horse stall barn, and this is a look down the hallway. It's really quite an enjoyable place. Here are pictures of the outdoor riding facilities. One's made out of tires, as you can see. And here's a picture of the vineyard facility, and it's progressing quite well behind us. Here's a picture of the vineyard being under construction, all with galvanized piping and water systems. The next three slides are an article that went into the Campbell River Mirror and featured the area last August. And I encourage you to, if you have a chance and in inclination, to review it. And it goes over the history of the property and outlines the environmental and community resource benefits of the project. We did ask for letters of support, and being on the school board, if we threaten to close a school, we get thousands of negative reports. In this particular case, we had nothing but letters of support and not one negative feedback. The following are a few examples of the letters of support, and included our correspondence section of in your package. Here's one here. Here's a letter of support from the Campbell River and District Chamber of Commerce. Quote, "We unequivocally offer our support for the proposed project of the Oyster Bay Rural Residential Community." Here is a support letter from the well-known local photographer, Paul Stobie, who lives close by. "I offer my full support for the development of the Oyster Bay Lands. I trust the Hagen family and know their interests are wholesome, genuine, and true to this community." Here's a letter from a local Oyster Bay business owner, Scott Gibson of Vancouver Land Sea Salt. "The proposed development appears to be an ideal solution to the needs and no doubt those of many others looking to relocate and contribute to this region." Here's a letter from Deanna Longland. Quote, "The vision and dream of the Hagen family is one that would benefit the community. Having a myriad of trails where horseback riding, walking, cycling would be welcome by those who enjoy living close to nature. We offer our support to this project." And one last one here. Here's a letter from, maybe it's not the last one. Here's a letter from Sarah McGeechee. "I am writing you to give my support to this project. What a wonderful opportunity this would be to provide young families to build long-term sustainable homestead type homes within the community they love. I'm sorry, there was one more. Here is a letter of support from Curtis Scoville, a neighbor connected to the Saratoga Miracle Beach Residents Association. I recently read the SRD report and positively impressed with the proposal. In particular, I like the proposal to offer the equestrians services and recreational opportunities for the public. I personally believe that agricultural and equestrian development can be done in an ecologically sensitive manner.
Okay, Daryl, you've reached your time, but I'll give you a few minutes because you had technical difficulties, so three more
appreciate
minutes.
Let's
Okay,
just
read
keep
this
on.
one.
And finally, here's a letter from nearby resident Will Dugart, a PhD who is the postdoctoral fellow at Pacific Salmon Foundation and Fisheries Ecology and Marine Conservation Laboratory in the Department of Biology, University of Victoria. There is an enormous demand for housing for families from a wide variety of income levels throughout the SRD and CVRD. I hope this plan will receive timely approval. An equestrian center tour was held on September 28th and attended by John McNeil from the SRD Planning Department and 4 members of the Area D Planning Commission. The Area D Advisory Planning Commission met on October 4th to discuss the application. The commissioners were supportive of the concepts, but the proposal but felt that they lacked the training and specific knowledge of land use planning to make a recommendation. Therefore, no decision was made. At the APC meeting, the area director voiced opposition to the project and stated the lands in the question should remain designated as industrial logging lands. There's an overwhelming local public support with no opposition by residents other than the area director. Input from the public going back 10 years to previous public meetings, the OCP meetings has demonstrated strong support for the concepts of homestead-sized lots surrounding a full-service equestrian center. The community is calling for agricultural opportunities, small-scale sustainable food production, which this project supplies. The public recreation opportunities provided by the Oyster Bay Lands proposal is supported by the local and regional population. Thank you. I tried to get through as quickly as I could there. I appreciate the time a lot.
You're good. Couple of minutes extra. So directors, are there any questions of the delegation? Director Anderson. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your time and your efforts. Is all of the land currently designated upland resource or forestry of some kind? And if so, or if not, if there was no rezoning or OCP designation of these lands, what would be the most intensive possible use as presently permitted?
Yes, I'll defer the question here.
Yeah, this is Rod Nugent. I know, but the 400 acres has a mixed zoning designation. Some of it is upland resource and some of it is 20-acre residential. So the upland resource designation, you could do things like shooting ranges or forestry, heavy industrial forestry. Of course, it's all logged, so there is none there to log. Also, you can have explosive storage and other industrial uses. So it's a mixture.
And how many residents would be permitted on one of those upland resource lots at present?
One house.
And so you're
in one case, 142 acres, one house.
Okay, so just at the highest level for me, who knows the lands only from driving by on the highway, how many houses would currently be allowed if you develop to the maximum and you're looking for a double, triple, quadruple. Like I'm not, this isn't a negative positive. I'm just trying to understand the difference between present and proposed.
Well, of course, the planning department is in control of what the ultimate designation and the zoning descriptions will be, including possibly creating new zoning
Sure.
categories.
I'm just
But
asking is what's proposed with the lot.
okay, there's 34. We're proposing 34 lots, which include the existing lots. So you'd have a maximum of, assuming one house per lot, you'd have 34 houses.
And at
I
present,
believe the question,
only
Rod,
be
was
half a dozen residences.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry?
the question is what's the full build out right now permitted of houses without any
Right.
zoning?
The existing houses. I think that maybe there's one lot you could build on.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, you get one under the existing zoning. You could build one more house. I believe there's one lot that's vacant.
Yeah.
Or two, maybe one or two.
Director
what
Anderson, I
most-
believe there's 11 lots currently. If so, I would assume 11 homes. So 11 to 34. That's, I'm assuming
Sure.
that, but I think Rod's a little bit maybe confused by your question.
That's fine. Something like triple the number of residences. What most strikes me in looking at this presentation is certainly there's a lot more development proposed, but from an ecological perspective, I wonder how much biodiversity increase this would allow as people have, gardens, and that's really my interest in this area. Are there ways of increasing the biodiversity in that area? Because at present, there doesn't seem to be a lot of incentive on this logged off land. Anyway, that's just something I will be sitting with and considering. Thank you.
I would move receipt of the presentation, please.
Seconder,
Second.
anyone opposed to the receipt? Okay. Your presentation has been received by the committee, and thank you very much, Daryl and Rod.
I really appreciate your time.
Presentation.
And I'd like to thank you.
Great, well, you're welcome, and we will be considering the report later and the correspondence later.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, on to item E, adoption of previous meeting minutes.
Move
That would be from
adoption. Second. And that's both sets of minutes, Gerald?
both January 12th, January 9th.
Both sets.
Okay. Second.
One comment.
Okay, comments, Nova?
I just noticed in reviewing the minutes that the December minutes that we received last time showed a notice of motion that I made in December that never appeared on an agenda in January or February. So I'm just hoping that that can come forward at our March meeting. Thanks.
Okay, staff have probably made a note of that. And on the receipt of those, anyone opposed? Okay, no business arising, or is there any business arising from the minutes? See none, there's no public considerations, no chair's report, staff reports.
Move receipt of
Number
the
one,
OCP amendment and
the-
rezoning application.
Second.
Okay, this is for the Oyster Bay Lands. Okay, so first we have receipt of the CAO's report. Anything to add, Mr. CAO?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think John Neal will speak to this for us.
Okay, John, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This application proposes to redesignate and rezone 165 hectares of land at Oyster Bay to allow the development of a 34-lot subdivision. Proposed lot sizes will range between 2 and 24 hectares, with an emphasis on equestrianism, small-scale sustainable agriculture and viniculture, and associated farm gate sales. The proposal appears to be generally consistent with elements of the OCP, as indicated in the table attached to the report, and maintains the area as a rural and country residential community. The proposal includes the provision of public amenities in the form of riding and biking trails, supporting the official community plan's objectives for connectivity. Surrounding land uses are consistent with the development and include forestry and rural residential developments to the east and the west, which include varied lot sizes ranging in area from between 2 and 20 hectares. The current proposal provides connectivity between these two established rural residential areas and provides an opportunity to diversify the existing economic base through the development of sustainable agricultural activities on the proposed lots. And given these considerations, it is recommended that amendment bylaws be drafted for the committee's consideration at an upcoming meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, John. I have one question. Did we have this before us previously to approve the referral list for this? Did that come before us, or is that my imagination?
Mr. Chairman, yes, the board approved the circulation list in January of last year.
Okay, and that, so what was circulated? If we don't have a bylaw yet, we just had the proposal. What was circulated?
Pardon me, it was June of last year. Basically, what was circulated was the applicant's proposal and the map. And so we sought basically comments from the various agencies in respect to the concept that was being brought forward. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so there wasn't.
And Mr. Chair, that's the first stage in line with our procedures bylaw, so that is quite typical, and that's what we did.
Okay, and I understand that. I just wanted to know if, like I said, if that was my imagination, or we had actually done that, or it was yet to come. So now I know. Thank you very much. Thank you, John, for your presentation. And do we need to do a receipt on John's presentation or not?
Mr. Chairman, you have a motion to receive the report already in front of you.
Okay. All right, so just on receiving of the report, is there any discussion? I see your hand up, Brenda.
Well, I'm so glad you asked the question about what was circulated to the agencies, because it wasn't a bylaw and it wasn't the definitive final decision of our committee or our board as to what should be circulated. I was really shocked to see some of the responses that came back in that circulation, particularly no comment from the Ministry of Environment. These Oyster Bay wetlands are some of the most environmentally sensitive wetlands in Area D. We, as a community, have been protecting and conserving that area for the past 30 years that I've been on the board. And before that, it is managed forest lands for the most part. It was zoned for forestry for the most part. There were 8 lots along the highway that were 20-acre parcels, and they have had gigantic mansions built on them, as you'll see when you drive by. Doesn't appear to be any farming or horses or anything like that, just like hotel-size houses. The land contains some very important salmon streams, amongst them Mayfly Creek which is on the north boundary of this property, that where they're talking about putting a lot of this housing. And RAD's put a lot of grant and aid money, volunteer support into enhancing Mayfly Creek and ensuring that we have salmon. There's numerous mammals that roam that property, that rely on that property for their sustenance, because their habitat is being wiped out almost everywhere. And they have wolves, bears, cougars, deer, you name it, it's there. As evidenced in the official community plan of Area D, the community put wildlife corridors throughout that property so that the animals could move freely down towards the beach. The deer like to go down to the beach to lick salt and stuff, and we have wildlife that the maps that were originally attached to our OCP, the environmentally sensitive area maps, had numerous trails, but they were wildlife corridors, not bicycling trails, not walking trails, not human dominated. They were for the residents on that land, who were the animals and the birds. And speaking of birds, this area of Oyster Bay is a major Pacific flyover for Pacific birds that come in from their migrations. They land on the wetland areas. There was, when I last took Ducks Unlimited out there to see the amount of water on this land, there is a couple hundred acres of water where these birds would fly into and land, and a lot of marshland and supporting the bird habitat. So ecologically, a really sensitive piece of land, and identified in the OCP as important, and also identified in the OCP for Area D is that the community wants to conserve as much as possible the green aspect of Area D's lands. It is managed forest. It should have been replanted after being cut 2 years after Weyerhaeuser had it. Instead, it passed through some various land developers who tried to zone it to one of them, Mr. Reister, went to 2 different public hearings and tried to rezone it to 56 residential lots along Mayfly Creek. And the public hearings were well attended with about 300 people. And the last one had no one in the room in favor of residential in that location. So when Mr. Hagan says that I'm the only person that opposes residential development on this land, he's quite wrong about that. I think that the community, unless it has changed a lot in the past 10 years since we last had a public hearing over there, this community really defends the environmental values that are presented on that land. It is wetland. It does have many tributaries of the Oyster running through it and meandering all over. It's very, very wet. I couldn't even imagine putting housing in there because it would have to be built on stilts. It's so close to sea level in most parts. It's flooding a lot. It's not suitable for residential development. I don't mind the idea of the equestrian center and a tack shop, because in the Craig Road subdivision, we have about a dozen 5-acre parcels that all have horses. Most of them anyway have horses and barns, and I'm sure that people who own horses would love to have a place to take them and ride with other horseback riders, and have a tack shop, and maybe even a vet in the neighborhood, something for the horse enthusiasts. And I don't think that that is a detriment to the rural nature of that land, but the housing and this mixed bag zone that the planning department have come up with, I totally disagree with that. And it's not consistent with our OCP. Our OCP has very clear land designations. And, you know, people know when they buy property in Area D, what they're allowed to do on it, what the size of it is. This proposed rural residential community zone is such a mixed bag of everything that, you know, what went through my mind when I read it is like, why bother having zoning at all? If you can put commercial, residential, equestrian, vineyard, if you can put all these uses and then build in some approval process that doesn't have to go to public hearing once it's zoned, I completely, utterly, totally object to the rural residential zone that's written. And I think the planning department needs to go back to the drawing board and come up with something that is suitable for that land. It is absolutely not consistent with the OCP. And I don't like these words in the report that it's generally consistent with the OCP. It is not. It is totally in opposition to the OCP. And so I don't know where this goes. I mean, I'd be happy to just, you know, defeat it right now.
Right now we're on receipt, okay? So let's just maybe wrap up the receipt and then we'll get
Okay,
to
so that's
item
what
B.
I had to say about the report. I think the report utterly and totally misses the mark. And as far as sending developer concepts out to agencies and First Nations, that's not what the electoral areas and the board have ratified. That is what Daryl Hagan and Rod Nugent have ratified. They're not elected. They're not in charge. So as far as I'm concerned, if the planning department simply sent out their concept paper, that is not our community. And that was quite wrong of them to do that. So that's all I have to say.
Mr. Chair, point of order there. Staff have followed the procedure bylaws.
No, they
and
didn't. They
Mr.
did
Chair,
not
point of
send
order.
out a bylaw.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr.
I
Chair.
am
This is an elected official's comment.
Okay. And Dave, do you want to continue with your comment?
I think I was pretty clear. The board has a procedures bylaw that the staff have followed.
No, they
That is
haven't.
submitting the applicant's information to the referral agencies. We simply have done that. We have done it hundreds of times that way.
Okay. Well, and I know we've discussed this before, and maybe it can be a topic of another meeting as to when the referral agencies get referred. But that's not what we're talking about now. Okay. So Brenda, can you please put your hand down?
Oh, sure.
And I'm going to move on to Nova. Nova, you're on.
Thanks. Director Lee had mentioned that staff had come up with a new zone, and I'm just scanning through this whole report again here, and I'm completely missing it if that has happened. What I see is a couple-page summary report from staff, referral agency response, and then sort of the initial information given to us by the applicants, and then a section of presumably the zoning bylaw, the historical existing zoning bylaw. So my first question is, has staff developed some kind of comprehensive new community residential use bylaw for this that I've missed? I thought that's what was being suggested that we direct happen next.
You're correct, Director Anderson.
Okay, so I after my comments, I would love to go back to Director Lee if she is willing to speak to what it is that she's finding so offensive that staff have drawn up. Does she have something that the rest of the committee doesn't have? But before Director Lee spoke, my questions were with us. I would love, because when I first came into office, my remembering was that Restorer had a big plan here, and it's a, it's a very, very clearly, huge proposal, and one of great consequences that really requires our attention. I very rarely go and have a tour of a property, but I did it April Point many years ago when that first came to our attention. And for these really large developments, I think it's appropriate for the committee members to be able to go on site and have a look. I did that just in my own initiative, and I could do that again here, but I wonder about planning staff helping to coordinate a tour that we could hear from the developers. We could also hear from the area director and ask questions of the planning department on site. I think that would be very useful. I would also appreciate, as Director Lee began to offer, a little bit of a history of these lands. So we have some idea into what we are stepping. So perhaps just clarification from staff about where we're at in the process. I know there's a back and forth here between Director Lee and staff about whether what we're doing is normal or appropriate, or where we're at in bylaw drafting, just for clarity. And then any response to the suggestion of a tour or a history would be welcomed. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to interject here if I could, please. What we are talking about right now is receipt of a report. It has many of those items that you have mentioned and Director Lee has mentioned, but item B is the place where the committee will either recommend or not recommend that amendment bylaws be prepared to allow further consideration of the proposed development. So I think we're sort of jumping ahead here, and we should finish up with receipt and then perhaps talk about these items when we get to item B.
It just seemed to me,
Is there
Mr.
any-
Chair, that we might not actually get to B, so I had some questions that I wanted to have answered, but your call.
Well, we will get to B one way or the other. It'll be either yes or no. So, that is getting to B. So anyway, on A, which is the receipt, is there anyone opposed to receipt? Okay, seeing none, the report has been received. Now, item B is that the committee recommend that amendment bylaws be prepared to allow further consideration of the proposed Oyster Bay Lands development as outlined in the OCP rezoning application. So this is where we would give direction or not to staff to develop bylaws to meet the needs of the application. Is that correct, Mr. CAO?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, so
Mr.
under
Chair,
this,
Mr. Chair,
yes, Director Lee.
I would like to move that item B be deferred for 6 months until the staff have conferred with the applicants and the community through maybe a community meeting to determine what the zoning description might be in this application. I am not happy with simply putting forward the concept that the developer came up with for this mixed zone of commercial, residential, and everything mixed bag mixed. So I would like it deferred back to planning for 6 months for them to come up with a bylaw that is consistent with the Area D OCP and which would, would respect the environmental values of this land and I don't want to go any
is-
further than that today.
The question I have is, do we have a seconder? We need a seconder. To defer it.
So we're not going to look into the zoning description being appropriate and
Mr. Chair,
consistent
staff
with the
already-
OCP.
Mr. Chair, staff have already provided that in this report.
Well, then I would move that B be denied.
Okay, do we have a seconder for denial of letter B?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Is there discussion on denial? Nobody, is your hand up on denial? Okay.
Yeah. Just for clarity, so the motion that's on the floor, I presume then would be that the committee not recommend that amendment bylaws be prepared. Is that correct?
That's how I understand
correct.
it.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think if the motion passes, it would be a recommendation to the board that the application be denied rather than no recommendation whatsoever. That's my understanding.
So
Fine.
Yes,
well.
that's the way I read it too, Tom. Thank you.
okay, so on that, knowing the tiny bit I know, I think that I would not likely be in support of what's being proposed, based on my history knowledge of the lands and, you know, a bit that I've heard from the proponent as well as the director. But I'm quite concerned about not allowing a landowner due process. And I think that continuing to help shepherd and craft good community consultation around this and give whatever time is needed, but I'm concerned about something of this magnitude not ever coming to the community for comment. So
Could I
yeah,
clarify something, Nova, please?
sure.
Okay, it was my understanding from a motion that was made and seconded that this would be deferred for a period of 6 months to do exactly what you just said.
No,
For
that motion.
No, they said I couldn't do that.
Yeah,
So
that
then I
motion
moved to
did not get-
deny.
Yeah, that motion, Mr. Chair, did not get seconded. The motion basically that's on the table right now is to deny B, to deny the application. No further work.
Okay, all right, I apologize. I was mixing the two motions and assumed that there would be the opportunity for the applicant. I mean, there is, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. CAO, but is it not still possible for the applicants to submit an application that is, you know, somewhat different or whatever to the planning department for review and referral and all of the other good things that we do, including possibly public meetings and those kinds of things? Could that not still happen? Even if,
I guess technically it could, but that's exactly what has happened and what we're doing. They've submitted a application. It's their application, their proposal. We put that out to referral. It's staff's interpretation that it fits the principles of the OCP. If the committee votes against moving forward, that will go to the board. And I think there's an obligation. It's highly unusual from my perspective that at this point that would happen. And I think it would be appropriate for staff to bring a report to the board on potential legal ramifications of that.
okay, well, I'm going to leave out the legal ramifications part. We're talking about a committee recommendation here, so I don't think, I think directors have, as elected officials, the right to say whether or not they want to move forward with something in their own area. So that's just my opinion, but right now we do have a motion that's been duly seconded. And Brenda, you had your hand up. Is it up for this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it is not only legal, but it is incumbent upon the elected officials to speak up when a community plan is not being followed. And this particular description of what would happen on that land is totally inconsistent with Area D's official community plan. Believe me, I know my community plan, and it does speak mostly to the environmental values, the wildlife corridors, the fish streams, and Area D's desire to retain those environmental features of the land. If the planning department had come up with something that was consistent with the OCP, then I wouldn't be objecting. But it's our responsibility to say, look, we're the gatekeepers for this community. And if an application does not follow our community plan, we are entitled to say, no, that's denied, go back. They can go back to the drawing board, come back with a zoning proposal that's within our current land designations in our OCP that would meet the criteria of the community, which we've gone to public hearing on this twice. Similar application, and the public turned it down like by about 100%. So,
Okay.
you know, what's the
got
point
it.
of driving something through that doesn't fit the OCP? I think deny it now, let them come back with something that does fit the OCP, write it into a proper bylaw, and refer it out to the agencies to get comment back.
Mr.
fact
Chair,
that-
that wouldn't follow the procedures bylaw, just for your
Well,
information.
too
That
bad.
isn't.
This is
Well,
my
too bad,
area,
Mr.
Mr.
Chair,
CAO, and I am not going to take
Okay, just
instruction
hang on.
from somebody who's not entitled to vote on this. You are not entitled to tell Area D how their land use is going to be determined.
Mr. Chair, I'm just
We
stating the
are.
procedures bylaw of the board.
I'm telling you, our elected officials are given that responsibility.
Brenda, that's enough. Okay.
Well, I would say enough from the CAO.
Mr. Chair, once again, we have a procedures bylaw. If Director Lee wants to make a motion to amend the procedure bylaw, we will not be presenting draft bylaws for out for referral. That is not our procedures bylaw.
Well,
If Director
then
Lee wants to
please would
make a
you call the
motion,
question?
Director Lee
as I
wants to make a
said-
motion, we will follow that.
Point of order. Point of order. Called by the chair. We are not going to discuss the future of the procedures bylaw at this particular time when we have a motion on the floor, which is very clear. It's to deny. And it has been moved and seconded. The procedures bylaw, if it needs to be changed or not changed or whatever, I think would be a good full day meeting if we have to, but does not need to be discussed at this moment. Nobody, you have your hand up? Is that new?
Yeah, simply, I think there's a level of confusion because I'm hearing from Director Lee that there is a zone already written up by staff, which isn't here, and the CEO has confirmed doesn't exist. If we pass B as written, that's what staff would go and do, would be take the proposal by the development and turn it into some, a suggested bylaw that may or may not look considerably different than what is being proposed. A developer has every right to bring something forward. As I say, I don't think I would support this as is, but from a process point of view, I'm very concerned about not giving due process, especially given that the OCP, however fantastic it may be, is decades old. And when times change so fast, as is happening on the globe right now, we can't always refer back to documents that we don't keep really live as communities change. Now, maybe the community has changed very little and the OCP is still totally relevant. But I think that giving staff the opportunity to bring something forward in response to this proposal is entirely appropriate. I understand the director's desire to just sort of not waste everybody's time, staff and the community, on something that's really not in alignment with what she thinks her community wants. But from a procedural perspective, I think we have to give people the opportunity. So unfortunately, I'd be voting against.
Okay, well, as I read it right now, what Director Lee has been saying is that this has been considered and it's, in her opinion, not compliant with the OCP, and the due process part is being done. It's being denied if that's the vote, and that a new proposal would come forward, most likely, since the applicants do want to do something on their property. So, I don't see that there isn't due process happening here. Part of the process is coming before us to decide whether or not we prepare bylaws. So that's my, editorial comment.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair,
so right now,
could I call a question on the motion? We could go round and round this all day, and since, the motion is really clear, and I think you're absolutely right, due process can happen. Once this one is out of the way and we have a planning department-led effort to hear what the applicants have to say after this is denied, maybe we'll get something that is compliant with our OCP, but we don't have it now, and we're obliged to say so. We're obliged
so
to defend my
you're asking
community.
for a question. All right. All right, so the motion is that the committee deny. Is that correct, Tom?
Well, Mr. Chairman, technically, I think it's a committee recommendation to the board that the application be denied.
Okay, so that would be the wording that would go to the board. All right. Without further discussion, is there anyone opposed to that motion? Okay, seeing none, it passes. Okay, so the committee is recommending that that this be denied. Correct, Tom?
Mr. Chairman, that's my interpretation, but I don't call the result. That's your job. I would agree. I don't believe any director voted in opposition to the motion, so it would be my opinion that the committee has now recommended to the board that the application be denied.
Okay, thank you. We will move on then. All right, so item 2, development permit application, Du Young Park. I am going to
Before you hand the chair over to me, may I have like a 1-minute break? Just a bio break.
Okay.
I don't think I can get through the next item without
Okay.
getting rid of my coffee.
Let's take a 5-minute break, or 7-minute break. We'll reconvene at 10:30 sharp, okay?
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, we're back. We're live. It's 10:30. Hopefully everybody has finished their business and are back. I don't see Nova or Gerald.
I'm here.
Are you? Okay.
There we
and
are.
Nova, you're there. Okay, see everybody. So we have our quorum back, and the next two items, item 2 and item 3, are both Area C items that I wish to speak to, but I would feel it inappropriate to speak from the chair. So I'm going to ask Director Lee to please assume the chair, and I will assume a spot in the audience and or at the director's table, and speak to it when I'm allowed. Okay,
Okay.
Brenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as chair, I'd like to ask for the receipt of the report on Du Yun Park.
Move receipt.
Second.
Moved and seconded to receive. Any objections to receiving? Okay, and Director
No.
Abram wanted to speak to this report.
Madam Chair, this is
Yep.
just a referral back, so staff don't have anything.
Director Abram?
Yes, thank you, Chair Lee. Okay, so I have just spent a number of hours each day for at least a week going through word for word 97 pages of local area plan document, which addresses this particular application. There was a comment made in the staff report said, since this proposal substantially complies with the development permit guidelines contained within the Quad Island Official Community Plan, it should be moved on, but I do not agree. Okay, this proposal, it falls short of complying with the Q Cove local area plan, which is within the OCP in a number of areas and needs to be rectified by the applicant. Now, in those 97 days or 97 pages, sorry, I found so many references to the items that were ticked off by the planning department in their report. Some of them as not applicable, some of them as just blanks, some of them as a different recommendation. And I have to say that I'll just go through and read my notes quickly so that I won't take up extra time. It took us 3 years by representatives of all sectors living on Quadra Island through a process of continual meetings, workshops, design sessions, and we had 3 architects participating throughout. One was the lead consultant. The result was brought to the public hearing, and it was overwhelmingly supported, then passed by the board, and then formed a part of our OCP for all to follow. And that public hearing was the most non-event that Quad Island has ever had regarding something as massive as this. This is about the densification of Kwathiaski Cove and providing things like affordable housing and walkable community, etc. The items that are not addressed in the application that was considered by staff are of concern to this community. So I only picked out 4 things, basically, and I'm just going to go through them quickly. So one needs to understand that the rural character of the islands and the limitations in certain circumstances of island life to understand how important some of the items not considered in the report impact the population. One of the first issues is the creation of additional traffic to an already overloaded intersection. And it's actually right in about the 3rd page in section 9, 4.11A1 talks about, and this is where I screwed up before and I asked for a traffic study. Well, the LAP actually talks about a site survey / plan and analysis showing any issues regarding all abutting streets and lanes to a public road. That's what this is. That's what we have here. We have a driveway, a very, very large paved driveway that comes down from this facility to a 90-degree T into the busiest road on Quadra Island. The driveway joins there, and highway says they do not do traffic studies on private developments. That's fine. It's the responsibility of the applicant, and the applicant said they weren't willing to do one. So this is why a traffic study was asked for, even though it was a wrong term, and I didn't get the name right. It should have been a site survey and plan and analysis. Okay, so the section above is what is desired, that plan and analysis. We need to know the impact of joining a road that is the main connector to the ferry, which sails every hour and will be sailing every half hour in the spring with approximately 150 to 200 cars per hour. The DFO Main Harbor Authority parking lot, which adjoins this, same road, comes right into the driveway to the development. And it's at capacity most of the day. Now, I forgot to get the number, but I would say it's 50 to 60 cars that are in that lot at all times. It's for ferry traffic parking, and it's for the whole DFO Harbor Authority parking, which is all of the marina, all of the boat ramp and the fishing boats and the trailers and etc. It's also a matter of emergency vehicles, fire, ambulance, police, and 2 school buses every school day, 4 trips in and out of that road, having to go, and they always have to cross ferry traffic. So it's a real bottleneck there where they have to sit and wait for people to let them in. And it's right at that intersection. There's also I mentioned the emergency vehicles, but then there's tourists, we've got restaurants, coffee shop, considerable amount of use that has not been taken into account. That's why I was concerned. Okay, this has been before our safety council and before our ferry advisory committee. I can't even count the number of times, how many times we have dealt with this intersection and tried to come to a solution with different stop sign configurations, lane configurations, flag people. It just doesn't work. Okay, in the same section under C4, the LAP states that any proposed connections to and from development site in terms of greenways, pedestrian and/or cycle trails, that's a quote, should have a development plan indicating how this will be accomplished. Throughout the report, it talks about these not being applicable. Well, I'm sorry, but the LAP, the main purpose was to do this, to make it a connected, walkable community, and that's not what this is doing. Another section states that the development should have safe, easy access that is separate from vehicular access. The only access that's provided at this time or in the new proposal is the roadway. So there is no separation whatsoever. A number of years ago, I got a 3-meter assessment, easement, all along the front of this property that goes from the main road to the small house that is right at the cliff, which is at the bottom of this development, and it borders our regional park. That's not even mentioned as part of that connectivity issue. We have a park right there that was part of a subdivision donation, 35%. Okay, the entire LEP is focused on densification of the cove and a walkable, rideable, connected community. Quote, the plan reiterates this point over and over throughout, page after page. So moving on to the character of the cove, it was envisioned that it would take on elements of the old early 1900s development that was here with boardwalks and piers out over the water with small scale commercial business on the ground level and residential rentals above to provide for shopkeepers and for affordable year-round rental housing space. I've provided a photo, which I don't believe, I don't know if it came up on Edie's screen or not, but I don't believe so. It's a JPEG of what the waterfront looked like when it had this multitude of piers and boardwalks and housing and businesses all mixed in. One of the next items was the pitch of the proposed route. Admittedly, by staff, it is 50% of what the plan calls for, and staff are saying that's okay. Well, it's not in character with what was envisioned. The use of dormers would have helped, but instead a clear story feature is proposed, and what's the word, approved by the planners as sort of making up for the dormers. It's a totally different thing. Clear story is just a slit of window across the length of the roof ridge. It's not a dormer, as is called for in the plan, and is considered considered by staff as acceptable. I'm sorry, but I'm reading this off of my iPad. The parking spaces mentioned in the report hardly seem adequate for the resort and the convention center. That could lead to participants needing to use the overcapacity parking provided by the Harbor Authority parking lot. This needs to be addressed on the property in question. The entire cove is overstretched for parking at the present time. The other concern that is not addressed is the runoff from the huge paved area that will be the new parking lot and the long paved driveway, which already has a horrendous amount of runoff during a rainstorm. This is a considerable amount of area, and it is shown in many other studies to provide deleterious substances, oil and gas, etc., that then float into the salmon and trout creek at the bottom of this driveway. It crosses the Salmon Creek. Very little attention is paid to redirection of that runoff. There's no protection from getting it into the stream. This is one of the few salmon streams we have on Quadra, and it needs all the help it can get when we are working so hard to enhance the fisheries economy in this entire area and the entire coast. I'd go on, but I will leave it at that for now. I believe that this is part of the motion. I believe that out of fairness to Mr. Park, I want to be clear on that. I want to be fair to Mr. Park. Out of fairness to Mr. Park, this application should be referred back to him to thoroughly and comprehensively meet the LAP policies and then bring it back to the ESC for consideration. The current staff report is not reflective of the policies stated in the LAP, and it needs another assessment. And I thank you for allowing me as much time as you did. You have the motion I believe on the screen. I can't see it, Edie, but maybe you're going to put it up at some point.
Thank you, Director
And there,
Abram.
it's a
Your
short motion.
constituents are so lucky to have you keeping an eye on their local area plan and making sure that Quadra Island gets the very best out of our planning. So I think this is a totally appropriate report. And there's a motion in front of us. Anyone want to speak to the receipt of the report before we have voted on receipt, haven't we, Tom?
Madam Chair, you have received the report already.
Yeah.
But you do not have a seconder for the motion just put forward by Director Abram.
Okay, do we have do you want to speak, Director Anderson, before we second this motion, or Director Anderson?
Can we get a second?
I'll second.
Can we get a seconder first?
Okay, Gerald Wally, Director Wally has seconded the motion, and Director Anderson?
Thank you. And I too applaud Director Abram for the thoroughness of his review of the good work that his community has done. But a question through to staff. I think, if I understand planning processes correctly, I think we're in a bit of a catch here, because although the local area plan is part of the OCP, that the development permits are also part of the OCP, but I would expect that during the review of the local area plan, the development permits probably did not get updated. And those development permit areas and guidelines probably date back many decades now. And although clearly, as Director Abram has intricately outlined, they are very much connected as far as the community has put forward with a lot of care and time. But is it not true that the development permit areas and criteria probably predate the local area plan, are not up to date with the community will? This applicant has made application into that older document, and are we not beholden to honor our local development areas and guidelines at this point? And if all of that is anywhere near true, then it underlines the incredible importance of having the staff resources to update these long-range planning documents, which this board has failed to fund this year. So I'd love reflection from staff on the interplay between those things I brought up. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Anderson. Any further discussion? We have a motion on the floor. If we could see it again. Oh, Director Abram. Sorry, and Director Wally, did you?
Could staff please be allowed to answer my questions?
Staff, do you have an answer to Director Anderson's questions about whether the development permit guidelines were the only thing considered and predate this local area plan, or why the local area plan wasn't considered?
Thank you, through the chair, to the director. Well, fortunately, actually not unfortunately, fortunately, Director Anderson is not accurate when it comes to our development permit guidelines. The local area plan was developed with specific development permit guidelines in place for each of the areas within the cove. The area in question is the village waterfront mixed use and village aquatic area. The development permit was examined and reviewed according to these new development permit guidelines, and it has been determined that they are in line with these development permit guidelines. What the area director is quoting is policies from the local area plan that help guide the vision for new development in the cove when contemplating new land uses within the cove. That is the overall vision. What we're doing today is we are considering a development permit for a use that is already permitted within the cove. We are looking to approve the form and character of the approved development. The policies that are outlined within the overall village plan would be applicable for a rezoning application. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
I would like to speak, Madam Chair.
Yes, Director Abram?
Okay, that sounded very nice. Aniko, thank you for that, but you talk about new developments in the Cove. Well, a 90-seat convention center is a new development. It should have been considered to be a rezoning to something like public assembly or one of our other zones that we have and change the zone, rather than try and squeak it into a development permit situation. This is not a small matter. This is a huge matter in the development of the mixed-use waterfront, whatever you said the title was for that particular area. This area is the cornerstone, the gateway to Quadra Island, and it is extremely deficient in providing for the growth and the use of Quadra Island by members of Quadra and Cortez. They have to use that ferry too. And, you know, they have to deal with those traffic snarls at that intersection. So those kinds of things are definitely pertinent for both directors, myself and Nova, and definitely pertinent to the majority of Quadra Islanders that actually do go down there. Everybody uses that intersection at some point. Some every day, some once in a while, but it's not something we can just gloss over and say it doesn't count. As far as form and character, this does not meet the form and character that was envisioned by the dozens and dozens of people that sat on those committees for 3 years, with architects advising what's good, what's bad, what doesn't matter, what really does matter. And this area, this horseshoe of development area, is probably the most important part of that entire plan, and very much time was dedicated to trying to get us to I think most of you have probably been to and seen places like Telegraph Cove, places like Steveston, that have the kind of thing that we're trying to develop here in Quathy-Askey Cove. And, you know, it's being thwarted by a development that goes in that totally doesn't fit. You know, it's a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't fit. Okay, so I think we have an obligation as directors to say that this development permit application should be given back, and I'm being as fair as I can here, to allow Mr. Park to deal with some of these things. These are not impossibilities. Every one of them can be dealt with. It's just a matter of will. If he's interested in putting this in, then look at these points that have been brought forward. And I'd be glad to provide my notes, all my notes, to show that what the planners looked at does not meet the policies. Annika was correct, they are policies. But those policies should have been taken by the planning department and worked into the development permit guidelines, and they weren't. So now we're working on, as Nova said, some outdated old development permit guidelines that don't guide development in the area. They allow development in the area that is not compliant with the local area plan. I'm sorry. So that's my motion. I believe, out of fairness, that Mr. Park's application should be referred back to him personally, and his group of architects or whatever, to thoroughly and comprehensively meet the LAP policies. I said it right in there, and then bring it back to the ESC for consideration. And,
Madam Chair, if I,
maybe that.
I can't
Go
put my
ahead,
hand.
Dave.
Excuse
can't
me,
put-
Director Abram is still speaking. I'll recognize you as soon as he's finished.
Yeah, I'm just saying I
Okay.
can't put my hand up in the boardroom, so we have no other choice here. The chair isn't here to recognize us, so
You
our
just
only
need to
opportunity are
put your hand up put your real hand up when you want to speak. I
you
want
can't
Director
see me.
Abram.
You can't
I
see me.
can. I do see you.
Okay, I
Director
will.
Abram?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak. I'll stop there and allow you to notify or recognize our CAO for his comments.
Okay. Recognizing the CAO, would you like to speak?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Just for practicality moving forward, in the boardroom when the chair is not here, the only opportunity we have to do is to cut in. So we can't put our hands up, can't be seen.
You can go like this.
Yeah, again, I can't see you because the motion is on the board. So I'm saying there is no other way other than to cut in. Having said that, there's some problems with the motion that I can either address when it comes to the board, that staff have already acknowledged in reports into the applicant that it meets all DP guidelines and policies. So we will not be responding to the applicant that it does not meet. And I can do that at the board. If the director wants to modify the motion that it says it doesn't meet Director Abrams' interpretation, but staff can't go back to the applicant who we have supported and says it does meet the DP guidelines and policies, and then say it doesn't, if that's clear. So if the director wants to identify in the motion his interpretation, we're happy to pass that along, but we're not going to say what we thought met it now all of a sudden doesn't, if that's clear.
Okay, thank you, CAO. Director Anderson?
Thank you. So just to be clear, make sure I'm understanding what our CEO has just said. Can we have the motion back on the screen? What I believe
Director
I'm
Abrams'
understanding.
motion?
Yeah, what I believe I'm understanding from the CAO and from the context here is that although this application does meet the development permit guidelines and therefore was recommended by staff for approval, Director Abram is certainly saying, and perhaps all would concur, that it doesn't meet the policies and the spirit of the local area plan. And perhaps the development permit guidelines didn't capture the spirit enough or go as far enough to speak to existing developments as opposed to just new ones. But it's unclear to me under what authority, and I super respect Director Abrams' desire to try to meet his constituents' interests as reflected through the local area plan, but it's unclear to me by what authority we can deny or continually refer and defer and refer back and a development permit application that meets the guidelines set out. So out of goodwill, we could ask him to come forward again. But again, I'm, just like the Oyster Bay, I'm back to a real procedural fairness question about if they meet the actual requirements. I don't know on what grounds we're asking them to do more. It seems like it's a deficiency either of our regional district or the laws that we work within, that those development permit guidelines didn't really reflect the spirit of the community. So if I have any of that incorrect from staff, I'd like to continue to understand the interplay between the local area plan policies and how they informed the development permit guidelines. Is there a way of having development permits applicable to existing builds? I mean, this is a new structure on a existing built property. So what's the distinction between an entirely new build and a new building on an existing built out property? And why would one capture the requirement to submit a development permit that complied with the local area plan and the other not? It's just still very confusing to me.
Do you have an answer for that, staff?
Well, there's a lot there, so I'll try my part, and then if Annika wants to jump in, happy to add her. But I've said many times, staff just provide recommendations, and committee and board make decisions. All I'm saying in this resolution is, the resolution appears that staff are going to go back and say it doesn't meet the LAP policies when we believe it does. So we're not going to do that because we've already acknowledged that from our opinion it does. Now, if Director Abram and the committee think it doesn't, then the motion needs to be clear that the directors don't believe, because we've already acknowledged that we feel it does meet those policies. So I'm just saying some clarity on the motion. I'm not going to go back and tell him through this motion that it doesn't meet something that we told him we believe it met. If it comes from the directors, that it's a director's opinion, that's much more clear, and we can easily relay that message. Annika could, again, if we're going to look at the LAP policies, I think she's going to say it's a permitted use within the zone. That's why it's a DP application.
Director
Yeah.
Abram?
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yes, I really appreciate what Dave just had to say, and he changed his wording considerably from the first comments that he made a few minutes ago. Rather than pinpoint Director Abram, he said the directors. I did what I have been told by Mr. Leach is the appropriate thing to do, which is if you want to do something different than whatever staff have recommended or whatever, it has to go to committee, and the committee has to make that recommendation. That's what I'm doing. I've brought it forward to the committee, and I'm asking the committee, and I would be more than happy to see this motion say, I believe, out of fairness to Mr. Park, that the Electoral Area Services Committee feels that this application should be referred back to him to thoroughly and comprehensively meet the LAP policies, and then bring it back to the ASC for consideration. I believe that would what you just said, Dave, was we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I think that brings more clarity. Yeah. No,
Okay,
that's exactly what I was saying. Yeah.
May I ask for some clarity myself as a chair? Okay, so
could I just
Director Anderson,
could I just finish, Madam Chair?
Sure. Sorry.
Okay, so I appreciate the fact that Dave brought that up, and that it was an error on my part to not include that this is a committee recommendation to the board, not a Director Jim Abram recommendation to the board. If the committee agrees, the committee will make the recommendation, and that allows staff to save face and hand it back to Mr. Park and say, this is what the directors would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Anderson, you put a comment in the chat saying that the SRD board, out of fairness to Mr. Park, that's basically what Director Abram and the CAO have just agreed upon, that it's going to be the board that gets our recommendation, and then they're going to, approve or deny. So
The
the
board-
wording of
the
the
board-
motion would be that the SRD board out of fairness, or that the committee recommend that the SRD board out of fairness to Mr. Park.
Point of order, Madam.
Yeah,
Point of order.
Director Abram.
Okay. That is not my motion.
Okay, let's get it
It's that the
clear what your
electoral
motion.
service committee, that the Electoral Area Services Committee believe this application should be referred.
Okay.
If you say the board,
Okay,
it'll still be the same thing.
yes.
So you could correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but if this goes to board, this will be voted on by the board, but the board will consist of 4 electoral area directors. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, we will faithfully, to the best of our ability, take whatever motion is passed today from the Electoral Area Services Committee to the board as a recommendation to the board. And if on this particular motion, I believe that only the participants in the planning service would have a vote as to whether to follow through or not.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yates. And thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. And just, can I just say something briefly? I think you could leave out all the first 2 lines of the recommendation and just say that just say that this application be referred back to the applicant to thoroughly and comprehensively meet the LAP policies and then bring it back to EASC for reconsideration. I don't think your motion should have any, well, if it's going to get through the board, you should try to leave out anything that is extraneous to the heart of the action. So, all this stuff that I believe out of fairness and I think that we believe the EASC believes this application should be referred. I think the first 2 lines should go, and you should just say that the application be referred back to the applicant to request that he thoroughly and comprehensively meet the LAP policies, and then bring it back to the EASC for reconsideration. Don't you think? That would be straighter.
Okay. If you allow me to speak again, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
I totally agree with what you're saying, except for the fact that I was trying to make it very clear to the board and to Mr. Park that we are being empathetic to his situation. And it is very clinical to start it at the Electoral Area Services Committee believe from there. With the addition of what I put in, I believe out of fairness to Mr. Park, it makes it more personal and less sterile. If you want to, if you feel, and if staff feel that eliminating everything before the word the electoral, if we eliminate everything else, you feel that is good enough, I'll be more than happy to do that.
Jim, I've offered some wording in the chat that I think is clean. If you want to use it, you're welcome.
I have a comment here.
Director Wally?
Thank you. I agree with Nova on this one. In my opinion, the Electoral Area Committee doesn't have the authority to do anything except make a recommendation to the board. So I believe it should say the SRD board instead of the Area Services Committee.
Okay, and that's fine. If I've had clarification from Tom that the board is basically the voting members of the board would be the 4 electoral area directors, then that totally accomplishes exactly what I'm trying to do here. So I'd be more than happy to have you change that, Edie. If you would, I'm sorry to.
So
You
a
know,
friendly amendment? Is that going to be a
Yeah.
friendly from Directors Anderson and Wally?
I can't find your chat.
Jim, what I
Why
wrote
isn't-
was that the EASC recommend to the SRD board that this application be referred back to Mr. Park with the request that he thoroughly and comprehensively meet the LAP policies and then bring it back to EASC for consideration.
If I can just
Okay,
jump
yeah,
in, Madam Chair, for a second, and I don't mean to belabor it, though. I can address it when the report comes forward to the board, but what I'm trying to relay is we have to differentiate the correspondence back to Mr. Park. The staff have communicated with him that it does meet this. So if we're gonna have direction back to him, it has to be from another source. And that's why I'm saying that this interpretation is coming from elected officials, if you will, not from staff, because we've already told them it agrees. So I'm just trying to get a resolution here. And again, I can address it when the report comes to the board, that it is the EASC board, whatever, that is communicating back to him that they don't believe it meets these because staff believe it does.
And if I could, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I see what our CAO is saying, and I think that the motion is very clear that there has been a difference of opinion between the staff and the committee or the board. So all staff really have to say is staff have communicated that they are okay with it, but the directors have communicated to us that they are not okay with it. Does that not cover it, Dave?
Yeah, that's the intent. I just want to make it clear that, yeah, when we're going to give somebody a message back, you can't have the same person give two completely opposite messages. We've given one, and this will be the message that the interpretation then has come from EASC / the board.
Yes, and I think that you can, defend your staff very clearly and carefully by saying that staff have given you this staff have made this recommendation, and the elected officials do not agree with it, and this is what they are putting forward. So everybody's covered. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay. Okay, so now
So the second
this no-
recommendation is
is the second one.
This is
Excuse me.
the one that Noba has in the chat, that Director Anderson has in the chat,
The
I
bottom one.
believe. Yeah, the bottom one.
Okay, the
And for
ESTA
clarity,
recommends every board.
this speaks to LAP policies, which are different than the DP policies. So that I don't see this as in direct opposition to what staff have said. It might not be as legally pertinent, but it is complementary, and that is my intent.
Okay, and I agree with the change that Director Anderson has made, and thank you very much, Director Anderson, for your wordsmithing. And I would make that motion as my friendly.
Okay, so the first half would be, Gerald, do you agree with eliminating the first motion
Yes,
and replacing it?
The bottom one.
Yeah, me too. I think the bottom
Okay.
one is really clear. Okay, so
Thank you, directors, for helping.
okay, and so the motion is that that EASC recommends to the SRD board that this application be referred back to Mr. Park with the request that he thoroughly and comprehensively meet the LAP policies and then bring it back to EASC for consideration. Or you might, yeah. So that's the motion. Any further discussion? Dr. Abram, do you still want to speak? Your hand's up. Dr. Abram?
I'm sorry. No.
Okay. So
Take it
everybody,
down.
are we ready for anyone opposed to the motion? Hearing none, it carries. Next item is thank you. Next item is the Blinken Park, Quadra Island, Crown Land Acquisition Request for receipt of report first.
Move receipt.
Second.
Moved and seconded to receive. Any opposed? Hearing none, that's carried. And okay, so we have the report. Do we have anyone speaking to this report? Would that
Madam
be
Chair,
Director Abram?
just to staff first, I don't think there's really much to add from staff.
Okay, Director Abram?
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate that this has come forward. This is something that I have worked on for many years, since my original 9 years of work on this with Beth Reese, your former, I guess, chief of planning. I'm not sure what her title was at that time. But we went back and forth between the society and the government, being Municipal Affairs and FLNRO, to try and get Lot 205, which is, you'd have to see it on a map, Lot 205 in its entirety as a free Crown grant. What we ended up with, and this includes what is now there as the Quadra Island Community Center, which is worth over $2 million, assessed at over $2 million, I believe. So that's a heck of an asset for the regional district. And we got it for free. We got the free Crown grant after walking into a huge meeting of ministries and ministers and others at the community hall with 2 Apple boxes full of files on this previous move. So since then, there has been a need, because of the growing population and the growing recreational need of population of Quadra Island, to try and get the remainder of 205 and Lot 123, which, if you are familiar with Quadra Island, there's the main road, which is West Road, that's where the hall is. And then there's the back road, it's called, which is Harriet Bay Road, which goes past our cemetery, our ambulance station, our fire hall, all those places. So this land goes straight through from the existing park. The lot lines go straight through to that back road. But there's a division across 90 degrees. We want to get that back part, and we've been trying, and we've been getting turned down. And ironically, one of the people that has been in touch with Onoco and meeting with Onoco about this, making this application, he was the former district manager of the Forest Service in Campbell River. He was Charlie's boss, and he's a really good guy. Seems quite young, probably, maybe he's 60, I don't know, but that seems young to me. I had to apply through him at the time for Lot 123, because all of that other land is provincial land of some sort. It was either vacant Crown land, Crown forest, or provincial forest used for logging. And I had to get his approval, and he denied it. at the time. Now he's a resident of, well, he has always been a resident of Quadra, but now that he's retired, he is working with the committee and the Trails Committee and with me to try and get this property designated as free Crown grant once again. That's the optimum situation. We want it as free Crown grant. If that happens, great, it's all ours and we can do with it as we wish. If it doesn't happen and there's some other form of tenure that is needed, then we'll go through that. Part of 205 right now is free Crown grant, and a little portion of it is an actual lease, renewable every, I believe, 10 years, 5 years, and we get first right of refusal. And then there's license of occupation for the back portion, which is all the trails. So, you know, this land that we're applying for is actually already developed. There's trails all over it. There's people using it all the time. And it makes sense that it be properly categorized. It's park. That's what it is. And people use it as park. So I really appreciated the alternatives that our CAO put into the report of option 1 and option 2. Apply for it outright, apply for it in some form of tenure. So as one of the people that has, as the director, the elected director, I have pushed for this and pushed for this and have only gotten so far. Now, the Quadra Island Rec Society, which is a contractor to the regional district, has gone to the planning department and asked them if they could please apply for this. And I was told by the Quadra Island Rec Society that this was happening. I didn't hear about it from staff, but that's neither here nor there now. We have it in front of us. I would have preferred that I did get asked, since this is a very political issue. This is not a operational issue. This is political. We are going to be asking 2 politicians, one to sponsor us and one to give it to us. And the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Josie Osborne, and the Minister of Flinro, being I think it's Katie Conroy, are going to be the 2 people involved that I'm going to have to talk to and beg if necessary. And it's not below me to do that. This is important to our community. So I'm putting forward a motion. And the motion is
Madam
that
Chair,
as the director.
Is it on the screen?
Madam
Oh, sorry,
Chair,
we still on.
Yes, Mr.
Madam Chair, if I
Yates?
may, you haven't received anything yet to do with this topic.
Correct.
So there is a staff.
That-
Oh, I thought we had
recommendation
already received. I
no,
took the
Madam
vote on receipt right away.
I move receipt.
Well, if I'm wrong, I apologize.
Well, I
Okay,
thought I'd done it
anyway.
already. Do
It's
you want
now-
to do it again, Tom? For receipt?
No.
Direct-
No, that's fine. If you've already received it, that's fine.
I
Sorry
think
to
we
interrupt.
did. I think we did.
Okay, thank you both. And if I may make my motion, please. As the director for Area C, in collaboration with planning staff, I would move option 1, that the committee recommend that the regional district pursue acquisition of fee simple ownership over portions of District Lot 205 and the adjacent southerly District Lot 123 as an addition to Blanken Park on Quadra Island, with option 2, that the committee recommend that the regional district pursue acquisition by other forms of tenure. Excuse me, let me go back. After Quadra Island, if that fails, that we move option 2, that the committee recommend that the regional district pursue acquisition by other forms of tenure over portions of District Lot 205 and the adjacent southerly 123 as an addition to Blanken Park on Quadra Island as a fallback position, with the understanding that this is a political issue and the Director for Area C will be collaborating with staff in the negotiations with the ministers and other political figures necessary to make this happen.
Okay,
So
we
moved.
have the motion. Do we have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Can I ask for a friendly?
What would be the friendly?
Just that the kind of the first line get taken out. We don't have director for Area C. We just that the EASC recommended the board that the regional district pursue. I mean, Jim, you can make the motion, but I think that's just highly unusual.
Cleaner. Yeah, everybody knows that Director Abram is up to bat. Like he's getting these
Okay, that's
things in front of the board.
I'm happy with the addition or the friendly amendment from Director Anderson.
So it would start in the bold part. That the committee recommend that the regional district pursue application for fee simple. And if that fails, option 2
So
to
it
pursue
would
other.
say, sorry, Brenda, it would say that the Electoral Area Services Committee, in collaboration with planning staff, do we need to say would move?
My friendly suggestion was simply that you take out the non-bold sentence at the very beginning and leave the rest. So
Yeah.
Remove even option 1 and just start that the committee recommend and
Yeah.
if that fails, that the committee
Okay.
recommend that the regional district pursue.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, so just start with that.
There we go.
There we go. That looks like the UBCM style gold star that we look for.
I doubt I'll ever get a gold star, but
Is there any further discussion on the motions? I just have one quick question, and that is, I thought it was policy of the BC government that if there's Crown land that's going to be put up for sale or sold, that they are obliged under their policies in the province to offer the land fee simple to First Nations as first rights of refusal. So just wanted to know what if you. Yeah, can you clarify that?
Clarify that. I had that in my notes actually further down, but I didn't read them all. I mentioned that I have tried twice to get the land, but was stopped by the province due to this was new at the time, the provincial policy of the day to keep all Crown land available in case it was needed for treaty negotiations. Now, the Wewakai have already been approached by members of the committee, and they are in favor of this. So, it's the duty of the province to consult. We do it through our referral process, but, First Nations will certainly have a shot at this.
Okay. Okay. But you're good with both those two recommendations.
Yes,
so
I am.
Anything further from the committee? Hearing none, I'll call the question for approval of the recommendations. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, carried. Okay, and I think I can pass the chair back to Director Abram. Chair Abram.
Thank you, Director.
Thanks.
Okay, we're on to item 4, proposed Oyster River Flood Protection Service Area D.
Move receipt.
Report from the CAO. Moved
Thank you,
receipt.
Mr.
Is
Chair.
there a second?
Second.
Okay, seconder. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom will speak to this.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the report in front of you today is in response to a motion passed by the board quite some time ago, actually, to do a full analysis of what it would take, what the implications would be of having a service established for flood protection infrastructure, specifically the dike infrastructure at Oyster River. So this report is a response to that directive from the board to provide information for directors and for the public as to what that would look like. And at this point, we are suggesting that the committee could recommend to the board that we proceed with establishing a service bylaw and start the process for looking into whether this is going to be acceptable to the public or not. Thank you.
Okay,
Tom.
is there any further discussion?
I'm fully supportive of the flood protection service being established. I think it needs a little bit of publicity to the affected area within the 200-year floodplain to get some, to let the public know that we're doing this and that there'll be a minimal, looks like a fairly minimal cost to the service. The total cost quoted $8,350 for 400 properties. It works out to $13.50 for a $500,000 home. And even, it's not much for the kind of protection that people are likely to get from flooding, and flooding is going to be part of our lives for the next foreseeable future with climate change. The only thing is, I'm wondering about are the Oyster Bay lands that we spent part of the morning discussing, are they within the 200-year floodplain?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'm not sure 100% in response to that question. I believe if they're south of Mayfly Creek, then they may well be. If they're north of Mayfly, then there's a possibility. We'd have to look into that for sure. Yeah. And of course, the purpose of this exercise was really to look at properties within the floodplain area. And yes, we did not look at individual ownership or any of those issues, but really whether a major flood would affect the property or not. And that was the basis on which we proposed the boundary that you see in front of you.
So those properties south of Mayfly Creek, just for your information, do include the Oyster Bay Lands, which have tributaries of the Oyster and the Little Oyster flowing all through them all year round. Plus, at the front end along the highway, they are almost at sea level. So one floodplain from the Oyster River runs into the floodplain from the ocean, which if you drive past it now, I don't know what's going to happen with that big sandbar that's building up. And the bay itself is filling in with sand. And I don't know how that's going to possibly affect flooding from the ocean side on that land, but it's there, so it's visible. And I think that we need to carefully design the bylaw to include all potential flood properties, maybe even oceanfront along there, because we did lose half of the highway in November 2008 from a southeast storm, from high tides, heavy storm, and the ocean came up and just blew out the highway and flooded. And so I think that it's maybe more than just the Oyster, but I mean, this is a really good start. I'm totally in favor of this service. And once we receive the report, once we vote on receipt, I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, is there any further discussion on receipt? Tom?
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you had voted on receipt, but if not, again, I apologize.
Let's just do it again. On receipt, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, it's carried, Tom.
Move
Okay.
recommendation, move recommendation B, that the committee recommend to the board that a bylaw to establish a service for funding the maintenance and repair of flood protection infrastructure at the Oyster River. I don't know if you say at the Oyster River or in the Oyster River area would be better, because the Oyster River floods out to
Mr.
Oyster
Chairman, I think
Garden
either,
Road.
I think
The
either would
flood
be acceptable.
protection is actually at the highway or at the river.
Mr. Chairman, I think
Okay.
either wording would be acceptable.
Second.
Okay,
Okay, whatever. All right,
okay,
any further discussion?
no, it's great.
Anyone opposed?
Thank you.
All right, that's passed. On to item 5, electoral area financial assistance grant and aid service. Gerald, did you want to say anything about this?
Move receipt.
Second,
I was thinking other than that. Receipt, yes. Anyone opposed? No one opposed. It carries.
I have no further motion
And-
on this.
Okay. All right, then we'll just move on. Request for financial assistance, Area C. There's 2 items there. First
move
of all,
receipt of the
receipt.
report. Move receipt.
Second.
Okay. Sure. Anyone opposed? Carried.
Move the
First one
recommendation.
is,
Move
Second.
the recommendation is B, which,
B1 and 2, I
recommendation.
move.
thank you. All right. Seconder, there was a seconder, Gerald.
Yeah, second.
Okay, and anyone opposed? All those in favor? Carried. Request for economic development funding, Area C, receipt of the report.
Move receipt.
Seconder,
Second,
any discussion? Anyone opposed? It's carried. Item B, 1, 2, 3.
move B1, 2, 3.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, or sorry, anyone opposed? Seeing none. Carried. Request for financial assistance, Area D, CAO's report received.
Move receipt of
receipt.
report.
Second.
Second. I'll
Moved and
second it.
seconded. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item B, 1 and 2.
Move B.
Second. So it's B1 and 2,
Okay.
Gerald?
Yeah.
Discussion? Okay, anyone opposed? That's carried. Correspondence, I would suggest that we take items A through T as a block.
Move receipt.
Second.
Seat, all those, anybody opposed? Okay, that carries. The motion to receive items A through T.
We did that just now.
I thought we just received the report. Oh, no, it says correspondence. Okay. All right, sorry about that. Getting goofy here. All right, nobody's opposed, so it's carried. Director's report, Cortez Community Housing Society wastewater nutrient elimination monitoring.
Move receipt of report.
Second.
And if
Okay,
I
this
might-
was a late item put on here, but I agreed with Nova that there was no problem to put it on.
It's not the addendum. It did come out with the regular agenda publishing, but it came in on Thursday, I think. So back in June, if I might, Mr. Chair?
Sure, go ahead, Nova.
Back in June of this past year, 2021, the board passed a motion that staff be directed to work with the Cortes Island Seniors Society, which is very much in collaboration with the Housing Society, and the Cortes Community Housing Society, to investigate ways that the SRD could support funding applications for a stormwater study for the Rainbow Ridge Community Housing Project on Cortes Island. So that was our direction as of 6-7 months ago. So this is in support of that direction. The Housing Society has found this funding through FCM to do exactly what we have directed that we support them to do. So I would like to, I've got a motion here written out that I'll put in the chat. I would like to suggest that we do submit this funding application, but there are three, as I understand it, in the correspondence between staff and the Housing Society, there are three potential funding sources for our 10% contribution. So it's a 40% grant, $40,000 grant application to FCM. We need to chip in $4,000. My understanding is that we could do that either through the planning service, through the Cortes feasibility study for Area B, or through the Area B grant and aid service. I don't have a strong preference as to which of those we use. It seems very much like a planning matter, but that would need concurrence and funding by all of us. So I'd love to just hear whether my fellow committee members would be in support of that. If not, would this qualify for contribution from the feasibility reserve? Just love to hear from staff. I think that's a positive. And if not, we can do it from grant and aid. So based on staff's recommendation and the concurrence of my colleagues here, I would word the subsequent motion accordingly.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just to perhaps guide the committee in its consideration of this matter, I don't believe the feasibility study service would be appropriate unless you're looking to ask the regional district to establish an actual service for making financial contributions and or doing studies of this kind. Secondly, the grant and aid service, I believe, has been established for reasons like this. If the committee wishes to support a third party on the basis that they're providing benefit within the community, they can certainly make that recommendation to the board. So that would be my suggestion in response to the question. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Yates? Is this because it's FCM, which is not really an arm of the federal government, but it's federally related? Could gas tax not be used for this without being called piggybacking?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure personally, and perhaps others would have better thoughts on that. Yeah, the question would be whether gas tax funds can be used, because this is not infrastructure. It sounds like a study more than anything else. So I'm not sure.
Okay, is there someone there that can answer it, Dave or Mike?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, we would have to examine a little closer what the purpose of the funds were. That could take time. I don't know if this is time sensitive. Certainly, I think grant and aid is an easy one here if this is time sensitive.
If
the director.
Yeah, if I might, it's not time sensitive as far as I understand from the Housing Society. It's a rolling intake. I don't mind it coming out of grant and aid, but certainly that is the smallest pot. I see Mike here just say gas tax is for capital construction. Generally, but there are, unless the criteria has changed, there are some provisions for studies in gas tax. The reason that I was curious to hear from my three elected colleagues here around planning is, would it be appropriate to consider this to be a planning function contribution? The reason that I thought it was valuable to consider it coming out of feasibility study is, indeed, we've had many discussions over the years about creating a sewer service or sewer, septic sludge dewatering or sewer contamination studies in this area. This has been something that has come up many, many, many times. So if the $4,000 could come from the feasibility study reserve, in so much as we're trying to see whether this is an issue of contamination of lake water. And if it isn't, then great. We don't need to pursue other feasibility studies further. The study also would be really of value to the region, because it would look at whether the type 2 sewer systems do provide any kind of leachate into public water bodies. So it would be valuable beyond us, but I don't need to belabor it. One thought would be to just make a motion that the SRD support the submission of this application to FCM and contribute its 10%. And then between now and board, a little bit more investigation could happen as to which fund that would most appropriately come from.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if that's direction to staff or not. Like there is the shared wastewater service between areas B and D. If funds were to come out of that, you would need the support of the Area D director. I'm not sure then if you just pass the motion without clear direction of where the money is to come from. Again, I think feasibility, not so much. I highly doubt gas tax funds. But I think we would appreciate maybe clear direction on the funding source. We can examine what this study would be doing and more details of it, and therefore better able to advise where appropriate funds could come from. But if you're thinking about wastewater, that is a shared service with Area D, and you might want to find if there's concurrence with Director Lee on that.
Comment, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Gerald.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I think it would set a bad precedent to go to planning. I'm sure Area A has no interest in helping to fund this project on Cortez.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to ask a question of Dave or Tom or Mike or whoever. Is there a feasibility feasibility fund for Area B? And if so, if the money were taken from there and the project were successful, does that money not have to be repaid to the feasibility study?
It does, Mr. Chair. However, I don't think the intent here is for Director Anderson giving direction that she wants to create a service. That feasibility would be to create a service. I don't think we're doing that here.
That's basically what I was asking is there a service? And there isn't, so it sounds like you're limited to grants and aid or planning. I don't think you're going to get planning, but grants and aid would certainly be on the table, unless they can come up with the gas tax answer.
Okay, after we deal with receipt, I put the motion in the chat that just goes to grant and aid then.
Okay, and so we're on receipt still, Tom?
Yes, sir.
Okay, on receipt, any further discussion? All those in favor, or sorry, any opposed? Carried. Yeah, Nova, you want to make a subsequent motion?
Thank you. I realize there's a bit of a typo here, that the EASC recommended the SRD board that, well, I guess that's right, that we support the submission of a $40,000 funding application to FCM from the Cortez Housing Society, I guess, for their stormwater monitoring project, and that the SRD contribute our required 10% through the Area B grant and aid service.
Second.
Okay, seconded. Any discussion?
Just a question, clarification to staff. This is indeed an application that will be made by the society with our support, not by us. Is that right?
That's my understanding of the motion.
That's what the motion says based on my understanding from the Housing Society. I'm just asking for concurrence from staff that this fund doesn't have to be applied to by the local government. Is that right?
I think, Mr. Chairman, we would have to do further investigation to verify that, but you know, it may well be the case. I don't think we've evaluated that point yet.
Okay, so
Yeah, I agree that this is coming forward to, excuse me, to us. I don't know the details of this or whether it needs just a resolution or it needs to come from the regional district. We really have no idea.
okay, well, I trust between now and board that that can be looked into, and if there's any further direction from staff based on the direction that we gave last year to support them in this initiative, that you'll let us know if we need to go in a slightly different direction here. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's clear, and I think that staff have clear direction to investigate and change if necessary or proceed as necessary. So any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I've had my hand up. Director Lee?
Sorry, I just saw it.
Thanks. Yeah, when Director Anderson just spoke, she mentioned this is about stormwater monitoring. It isn't about liquid waste, and it would be really great to have more sort of scope on what is being applied for exactly, because it certainly wouldn't come under liquid waste if it's a stormwater monitoring project. And I support it coming out of grant and aid because it's only a small amount, not a lot, and it will help expedite their UBCM, their FCM grant application by offering $4,000 to match. So I think that it's good the way it ended up here, that it'll come out of grant and aid, and it's for stormwater monitoring, not liquid waste management.
Okay, well, I believe the motion original in the report says wastewater nutrient elimination monitoring. Whether that's going into the stormwater or not is.
Well, this motion says stormwater monitoring.
And I may have erred in the details of my writing. What Director Abrams said is exactly true. It is monitoring of the effectiveness of the septic field leachate from the Rainbow Ridge housing development proposed, this is all proposed, into potential stormwater ditches into lakes. So it's about making sure there's no nutrient loading into the public water system from the septic system that would go in to support this housing. And so, I mean, I would love it. This is a significant portion of our annual grant and aid. I would love it if there was some other fund for it to come from, but there's so little support generally that I'm not going to fight for it, and I'm happy to do it through grant and aid. But if there's other options between now and board, I trust that staff will make us aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
And just to finish up, you know, monitoring stormwater for leachate from septic systems is a highly questionable way of knowing whether the septic systems are operating properly. We had that kind of study done in Area D when Campbell River was trying to incorporate Area D a couple times, and it was found that what appears in your ditches is not just, you know, like deer, birds, dogs, lots of things deposit waste into the ditches, and it's impossible unless you do like a DNA test on it to determine where the source of that is. It's impossible.
Okay,
so just so you know.
Good information, but I think we're getting a bit off track.
No,
so let's
yeah,
get back to the motion. Let's get back to the motion, which has been moved by Nova, seconded by Gerald. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, anyone opposed? Seeing none, it's passed. Okay, Brenda, your hand's still up. I don't know if
I'm
that's
taking it
new
down.
or...
Sorry, I'm asleep at the wheel here. Okay.
All right, we're on to the addendum, Hagel subdivision. Correspondence from Marie Hagel regarding Hagel subdivision be received.
Move receipt.
Seconder?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? It's carried. Oh, sorry, discussion on receipt.
It just wasn't clear to
Didn't
me
think
if
there
there
would be
was
any.
any, it just wasn't clear to me whether there was any action required. This letter suggested that there were need for timely action, and I just didn't go back in the minutes to look at what had happened previously. If we could just have a slight recap if there's anything we need to be doing from staff.
Aniko can speak to this, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Aniko, you're on.
Thank you, through the chair. At the previous East committee meeting, this item was referred back to staff after discussion at the committee table regarding details pertaining to the covenants that are being requested to be registered on title for the Hagel subdivision. These covenants are related to their previous rezoning application that the board has already approved. And these covenants are related directly to the amenities that were agreed upon through that rezoning process. There were some questions when this was brought forward at the last EASC regarding the overall area and width of the covenant areas, as well as some questions regarding the length of the covenant areas provided. We went back to the property owners just to clarify the covenant details, and they have confirmed that these covenants went through a very fulsome process during the rezoning application, and it was determined at that time that these were the most appropriate ways to provide these wildlife corridors and protection of environmentally sensitive areas. There was a question at committee regarding the narrowest section of Covenant 1, and we have confirmed with the property owners that the narrowest point is 25 feet in width. And there was also some questions relating to why the corridor ended where it did. And this was actually at the request of both highways and during discussions with the APC and staff during the rezoning application. The corridors themselves are more related to avian traffic than to those for deer or bears traveling through the area and crossing the highway. It was actually recommended by highways that we don't use this area to funnel that sort of traffic through the highway. We're hopeful that these questions have been answered and that the committee will recommend that the board authorize a regional district to sign off on these covenants so that the owners can have their subdivision finalized.
So that was my question. Is there then a recommendation? Should we be looking at the previous staff report and either moving forward or giving different direction? Is this, I would have just hoped that this would have been on the agenda. Perhaps as a late item, there wasn't time. What's the next step for this committee then?
Aniko?
Well, it's staff's request that the previous recommendation that was provided to EASC is considered today. I don't have that recommendation in front of me, but it was that the committee authorize the chair and corporate officer sign off on both covenant documents.
Before we go there, Mr. Chair, may I speak? This is my area and I have something to say.
Yeah, I see your hand. I was waiting for staff to finish their presentation.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm in agreement that for those first 4 lots, that these are the covenants that were agreed to or supported by the APC and the EASC in previous discussions. However, the applicant sent their agreement for the covenants to their lawyer, and their lawyer wrote up one clause in the agreement, and it's clause number 9, that says this section 219 covenants will only apply to current owners. There, my understanding of environmental covenants on land was that we register we register on title that these are covenanted areas and protected, and that protection applies on the land and not to the individual property owner, because they have every intention of selling half of these lots. Like, their family will live on one or two of them, but then they'll sell them to somebody else. And if Ms. Sinnett's agreement that she wrote up only applies to the current owners, these environmental covenants aren't worth the paper they're written on. So between now and the next board meeting, I would like to refer this back to staff to look at that clause number 9 and eliminate it or straighten it out so that an environmental covenant being registered on title applies to the land and not just to the current owners. So I would make a referral back to staff to investigate this prior to this coming to the board.
Okay, is that good enough, Tom? Just a referral direction to staff, or you want it on motion?
I do believe so, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and staff are okay with that? It's certainly been my experience in Area C, 219 covenants go with the land, period. And, you know, I don't know if this is, you know, something that somebody is trying to change. That's one thing, but if it's called a 219 covenant, it's with the land. So
Okay.
anyway, that's
So it's a
referred
motion
back
to refer back to staff to straighten
staff.
out that clause number 9 in the agreement before it comes before the board.
Okay, it's just direction to staff. We don't need to have a motion.
Okay.
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 I believe, is there anything we've missed? It wouldn't surprise me if I did, but
I kind of
I'm
caught it
sorry
at
if
the
I did.
last minute because it came in on an addendum. So, you know, I scanned the document and that's the first thing that stood out to me was that clause number 9 in the agreement. And
Okay, well,
so
we're done with that, Brenda. We're done.
yeah, I think
We're done with
I
that.
hope it's okay. Other than that,
Everything's good. All right. See, nothing else. The only thing to do is, being cognizant of the time, is to call termination. Anybody want to move termination?
hooray!
So moved by
Terminate.
Nova. Somebody?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, we're done.
See you in half. Yeah, see you in
Sorry?
half an hour. See you next time.
Yeah, so we have to